that I'd like to discuss with you before the lawyers come in. So as Mr. Lewin came to me with Mr. DeGuerin, Mr. Chesnoff, and Mr. Lewis, a sidebar after that argument. So I had two problems. One was I do not want speaking objections. If you object, I'll review what was stated and I will rule on the objection. That's all you may do. Looking now at what Mr. DeGuerin said, I see what he said was, before the lawyers could get there, Mr. Lewin and his crew got there and started questioning him. So before the lawyers could get there doesn't suggest that the lawyers were on their way and that Mr. Lewin unethically or illegally spoke with Mr. Durst, and that would not be its argument. It's veiled argument, but it's argument. And as I made it clear to you when I spoke with you, the fact that Mr. Lewin was involved in this interrogation gives him an enormous advantage in this case in some ways, but also makes him vulnerable to criticism as an interviewer during the interview itself. The jurors, so there's a very, I think, a delicate balance between criticizing each other as advocates, which I will not allow, all right, or to impugn the integrity or the ethics of the lawyers on the other side, I will not allow. The circumstances under which that interview took place are fair game. In other words, the fact that though he waived his rights, he did not have a lawyer, fair game. But the suggestion of this was not. So Mr. Lewin sent me a proposed admonition. Did you look at it? Did you see it? I would abbreviate that very much. But I mean, there are some words here I would use. But what is your posture on me telling the jury, for instance, that the interview by DA Lewin and the LAPD was lawful, and I would add, and ethical, and that Mr. Durst participated in the interview without an attorney after being advised in waiving his rights?
Your Honor, could I just make a statement?
Yes.
Because a couple of things in this with regard to this. Let's suppose that in fact we wanted to establish that during the course of a particular interview, Mr. Lewin was leading the witness. It seems to me we're entitled to do that because regardless of him being a prosecutor on the case, at that point he's acting as more as an investigator. We have a right to say that the investigator is doing something which could produce testimony which is not wholly accurate. So
the nature of the questions are fair game.
And Your Honor, no objection to what Mr. Ray just said. I have no problem with that point.
Okay, but Mr. Ray speaking, you're not done.
The other had to do with the, I forgot now what it was, the advisement that you just read.
He waived his rights. He was advised and waived. Right?
Oh, I think that what it's done is it's prejudging, quite honestly, the nature of how the jury could ultimately view that interview, because there are circumstances of that interview that were really horrendous. I mean, he literally was taken out of a freezing place and offered food and coffee if he'd come and talk.
Sure, but okay, but you can say that. But are these things that I'm suggesting might be appropriate to say, for me to say, and what I say must be very limited. But to correct a criticism of an advocate's integrity is a problem that I think is legitimately addressed.
Your Honor, I know that the court is very careful about trying to protect the integrity of the attorneys in the case, and I fully respect that. My only concern is that the language of the court used not be in a situation that has the jury presupposing that there is no problem whatsoever with the way this interview was conducted. If in fact we are eventually going to be able to show that there is some problem where some of the interview or this interview or others were conducted.
Just to respond, Your Honor, they can address and attack anything about the actual interview in terms of if they think the conditions that it took place on, that you can say his lawyers weren't there. You can say that he was cold, all of that. what the court said is absolutely true, and it rebuts the inference that it was improper for the interview to take place. Now, I would add, Your Honor, although the juror is dismissed, we had a juror who has already brought that issue up. And what's interesting, Your Honor, is that was a juror who we caught going through media stuff. And Mr. DeGuerin, from the very start of this, has been very vocal in the media and interviews, accusing me originally of prosecutorial misconduct and unethical behavior regarding that interview. So what the court is agreeing, saying that they'll instruct is absolutely appropriate and necessary. And the court's abbreviated instruction is fine, Your Honor. We have no objection to it.
I have
Mr. Chesnoff wanted to interject. Do you want to? Who's speaking?
If I just finish, I would have no objection personally just for you saying to him that it's not that he is not unethical, but I think at some point the jury may have to come to a decision as to whether the conduct was troubling enough so that they would want to weigh the information that they got out of it.
I'm going to instruct them that they can, but I'm not sure I should do that now.
Your Honor,
Yes.
I apologize. I didn't hear exactly what it was that actually requires this. In other words, what?
Yes, I'll repeat it. So it was the inference in the opening, let's see. Hold on.
Before his lawyers could get there to the area.
Before his lawyer could get there, Mr. Lewin and his crew got there and started questioning him.
Okay.
Before the lawyer could get there, the implication of that is a wrongdoing, as if he's taking advantage of.
If you put it in context, Mr. Durst himself told Mr. Lewin if his lawyers were there, he wouldn't be talking to him.
Oh, yeah, I know that part. Let's see, before his lawyer could get there. So.
Well, that's a fact.
Your Honor, and the problem is the inference cannot be looked at in isolation. They have been making these statements.
No, that doesn't matter. In the media, it doesn't matter.
Your Honor, this admonishment needs to happen.
We moved to suppress it based on the fact that we said it was a coercive interview.
No, you said it violated that is incorrect. You said it violated the Sixth Amendment, and you said it violated prosecutorial ethics.
Before his lawyer could get there, he and his crew got there and started questioning him.
That's true.
No, it is not true.
Well, yeah, it depends on the tone of it. Also, Mr. Lewin and his crew also is sure. I mean, so that's an aspect that gives meaning to it, that lends a disrespectful quality. Crew is like a gang. They got there and started questioning. So it carries connotations of unlawfulness. So the interview that was conducted with Mr. Durst by Deputy DA Lewin in the Los Angeles Police Department was a lawful and ethical interview. No?
Your Honor, I don't know where in the law the idea that somehow a search or an interview is ethical.
Okay, lawful.
Your Honor, ethical.
I'm still talking.
No, Your Honor, ethical needs to be there. The AG's opinion, we litigated this. I gave the court authority. It's a 1993 California Attorney General opinion.
Okay, I remember.
Saying it's entirely ethical.
That's true, I did. Okay,
The court used that word before in court, saying it was ethical.
Right.
They don't want it in there because they want the inference that it's unethical.
I got that part.
All right.
Thanks for your help.
Hence the adversarial system.
Yes.
Okay.
With shots above the belt.
Okay, I'm not, I am, I think it's,
I think you're making more out of it than anybody thought it was.
you know,
I think if you say it's lawful, Your Honor, that clears it up for the jury that there wasn't an unconstitutional interview. And I think if you say ethical, it highlights it and actually is counterproductive to what the court would be trying to accomplish.
I'll remain open to, after further argument, to also saying that it's ethical at a later time. I'm going to say it's
I'm sure
lawful.
the court's not going to say it's ethical?
Well, you didn't even recommend that. That was my own invention.
Your Honor, the problem is, Your Honor, it needs to be said, it is ethical, that is a true statement of law, and the court has previously said this in motion. Your Honor, I'm not going to have my integrity impugned continually, so just think for a second, Your Honor, they don't want you to say it's ethical.
Now you're starting to act
I'm sorry,
contrary to your good character, because you are usurping my role.
Your Honor,
What you will not have presumes that you may tell me what to do, which you may not. So let's stop it. It is ethical.
what is the court's final instruction?
Yeah,
Your Honor?
ethical. Ethical. It's fine. It's ethical.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Not unethical, I guess.
Yeah, Judge,
Yeah.
This is what happens, most
Excuse me,
respectfully, Your
you just-
Honor.
Yes, stop.
Your Honor, this is what happens.
Yes.
You rule,
Yes.
tentatively at least. Rather than doing what you said, which is to listen to the court and allow the court to be the arbiter, the state of California continues to badger until the court does what the state says. I'm sorry to say it, Your Honor. That's just what just happened.
Mr. DeGuerin, you've
I was going to say it in a little bit more colloquial terms. I think he just beat you down.
Your Honor, that is completely disrespectful. The court has let the defense relitigate some of their motions 20 times, and the court continues. In the end, Your Honor, either what I've asked for is the state of the law, and the defense has repeatedly tried to create the inference that I was unethical. I appreciate the court recognizing that and giving that appropriate instruction. It's not asking for anything that should not be given. And the court changing the last word to was not unethical is fine.
yeah, that was my idea.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And one final word. What I said was true. Before the lawyers could get there, Mr. Lewin and his crew interrogated beginning at 6 in the morning.
Your choice of words changes its meaning. All right, you shade meaning. You choose words carefully. In fact, I have rarely met an attorney as skilled as you in shading meaning with words, and that's a great quality. It makes you very persuasive, and I appreciate it. I get it. It carries an insinuation that is of unethical conduct. And
Your Honor, just for the record.
I can't allow it.
For the record, nobody has ever said that Mr. Lewin doing what he thinks is right in this circumstance was unethical. The only thing we've ever done is challenge it based on the circumstances that Mr. Durst found him in. The court ruled against us, but it was never suggested that, and it's not now.
It has been said in court, Your Honor, and to the media, both. If
All right, no,
the
here's-
wants transcripts pulled, I can do it.
Not by
Here,
me.
stop.
By Mr. DeGuerin.
Stop. Now, the people keep referring to the media, and sure, that's important. You want to protect your reputation after it's being assailed. What I say to the jurors, though, is focuses upon the law and how they are to consider evidence. Beyond that, there is a concern that I have about the assaults on character ad hominem argument against counsel. I need to be very careful about that, in particular because you are subject to criticism, and you will receive it, Mr. Lewin, and that's not personal. That is part of the defense in this case. So I'm going to protect you in that way, but I am not going to protect you from the facts of this interview.
And Your Honor, the people did not ask for it.
That's right. Okay. Let's bring in the jury.
Who's going to be on so we know who gets to sit here? Sharif.
Is this where the question goes?
Yeah.
You got here?
Yeah.
Your Honor, I told Ms.
we're supposed to be on the,
I was just, when they were arranging, I told them.
are you on the record?
No, this is off, Your Honor. I'm just trying to help.
Okay.
I was trying to help. I told Mr. DeGuerin.
Have all jurors and alternates present. Mr. Durst is present with his lawyers. Mr. Lewin, Mr. Balian, prosecution team is all present. I did want to respond to an objection at the end of the defense opening with regard to a statement by Mr. Durst. The interview that was conducted with Mr. Durst by Deputy District Attorney Lewin and the Los Angeles Police Department was a lawful and ethical interview. Mr. Durst participated in the interview without an attorney after being advised and waiving his rights. That's all I have to say about that objection. So, with that, I am going to now let the people resume their presentation of evidence. You may recall the witness you left off with.
Officer Sharif.
Officer Sharif may come forward.
Thank you.
Swear him again. Technically, it may not be needed, but we're going to swear him again.
Please come stand in the witness stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give and the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name.
First name is Rashad, R-A-S-H-A-D. Am I allowed to take off my mask or leave it on?
I'm sorry, you must leave it on.
Okay. Okay, where was I at? First name, Rashad, R-A-S-H-A-D. Last name is S-H-A-R-I-F.
Thank you.
You may examine the witness, Mr. Balian.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Sharif, can you please answer the last question before we broke last time we were here?
I forgot what I had for breakfast today.
He practiced that for 14 months.
No, he's been waiting for a long time to ask that.
That's it.
I apologize. Your Honor, we actually had finished questioning and it was time for cross-examination, I believe you said.
Very well then, Mr. Chesnoff, you may cross-examine the witness.
First of all, let me apologize for having my back to you. It's normally you'd be there and you'd see me, so my apologies.
If you want to use the left turn and cheat it, you can also.
Okay, that's fine. I'm good though, Your Honor, if you are with
Yes,
me here.
as you wish.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nice to see you again.
All right, pleasure. Thank you.
Glad you're safe. At the time of your discovery of Miss Berman's body, you were a training officer, is that correct?
Correct.
And you were training rookie police officers in procedures, correct?
Yes, sir.
One important thing that you would train for is the preservation of crime scenes, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And that's part of the training. You talk to the rookies, you explain the importance of keeping crime scenes as secure as possible, correct?
Correct.
Another is to make sure that they don't destroy any potential scientific or forensic evidence, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What is SID?
Scientific Investigation Division. That is our kind of crime scene for the LAPD.
That's the CSI of LA?
Yes, sir. Civilians.
And they come to the crime scene after you have secured it, is that correct, generally speaking?
Yes.
Okay. And they come in and they look for blood or fingerprints or scrapings under a victim's nails or hair or fibers from hair or from clothing, fingerprints, DNA. Isn't that what they're going to come in and look for?
Yes.
Okay, and they'll look on different items that would be in a house, like a coffee cup, or a telephone, or a newspaper, any item that they think might provide them with some scientific evidence, correct?
Yeah, I think they're directed by like the lead detective or tell them, hey, you got to check this, check that.
And of course, one of the most important parts of the crime scene, and in this case, was the area where you found Miss Berman's body, correct?
Correct.
And oftentimes, the SID people will look for evidence around the body or on the body of the deceased. Is that fair?
Yes.
And it's important to see that the crime scene isn't compromised, so these SID folks can do their job of securing the valuable forensic evidence, correct?
You mean as far as I'm concerned, or the police, the officers are concerned?
Yes.
Yes, we have to keep it as well pristine as it was, when we started the investigation or arrived on scene.
And that's one of the things you train these officers, correct?
Correct.
And I think Officer Takina, is that how you pronounce it?
Tarakina.
He was a rookie that you were training at that time, correct?
Yes.
And he was with you, correct?
Correct.
Now, one way to avoid contaminating a crime scene is to wear protective garb, correct? Plastic boots, gloves.
Yeah,
correct?
I've seen that before.
Okay, now there were 4 patrol officers present initially. There was yourself, Officer Hale, Officer Takina, and Officer Mendoza. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And no disrespect intended, but at the time, after you discovered the body, none of you wore protective gear after the body was discovered, did you?
No, we did not.
Okay. Now, I'm going to show you some photographs, I hope, with some help from my colleague.
These are labeled, marked.
Sorry?
The first one is the People's 31-0.
The first one is People's 31-0. Do you recall that picture being the kitchen of the house you discovered her body in?
It appears to, I just that little section, I can't be 100% sure, but it looks like the kitchen.
That TV, it comes off when there's no source, so we need to turn that on again. It's one of those power-saving things, right? No?
Because I can't see what I'm doing.
Yeah. All right, we need to pause a minute to reallocate seats here. We're careful about our seat capacity in each location.
Thank you.
Yeah, is this working now for both? No, it's not working.
The problem is I can't see what's on the screen here, because my screen is split now. It's the interruption.
So you'll need to pivot?
We're going to have to.
If he calls him by the exhibit number, he can put him up on his computer if you want.
Yeah, okay, if you don't mind, the People's 31-0.
Do you have a list for them?
And then I have the rest of these that we're going to mark as we go, and I can give you a copy.
That won't be hard to read. If you read the 4 digits on the bottom, or the 3 digits,
I can read you the 3 digits.
we could do it that way.
Let me just give you the
Thank
copy
you.
now. We'll finish this out.
I'm glad all these people are here. I'd be lost.
What's that? Oh, right, you can use the elbow.
Oh, there we go.
Mr. Children?
You could just use
Mr.
the
Min,
elbow.
I'm giving them, yeah, perfect.
Mr. Milius, we have the Elmo here.
Great.
All right, whichever way.
Was it 310?
Yes, it's part of 310. Would you agree with me, officer, when you previously testified, the state showed you a series of photographs which were subsequently identified and marked and put into evidence as 310? Does that help you?
Now that I can see the full picture, I definitely remember this.
Okay, thank you. And of course, you see on the countertop, there's all sorts of items that would be amenable to review by the SID to see if somebody touched them, somebody bled on them, somebody drank from them, somebody put a cigarette out in them. There's all sorts of things available to examine. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. You see the newspaper that's on the table?
Correct. Yes, I do.
Do you remember, by any chance, having looked at that and seen what date was on that newspaper?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to show you a photo. Am I doing this right, Phil?
No, we've got it over here. Just
Oh, you do?
Which number?
It is 73.
For the record, when he says 73, this is not how they're marked for the court. This is an internal reference number to project them, so he should call it,
Yeah, this would be a
Defense one.
defense.
Defense
Defense
A.
Exhibit A. Sir, you see that photo?
Yes, I do.
The person in the shoes, are those the shoes that are worn by the patrol officers?
I don't believe so.
Do you believe that those might be the shoes belonging to either someone from the paramedics or perhaps the detectives who came to the scene?
objection calls for speculation.
overruled.
Well, I'll say it's definitely not a uniformed officer. It could be someone else that was at the scene, but just from the way the pants appear and the type of boots, does not appear to be a uniformed officer, one of the four of us from that day.
But the only people that were there were either the uniformed officers, the people from the fire department, someone from SID, or a detective, correct?
Correct.
So it's someone in a law enforcement capacity, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that person wearing booties?
No, they're not.
Would you tell the jury how far you think that person is from the body?
3 feet maybe?
Okay, so within 3 feet of the newly discovered body, there is a person from law enforcement not protecting the scene by wearing booties, for example, correct?
Correct.
Do you see the telephone there?
Yes, I do.
Does it appear to be off the hook?
Yes.
Okay. Did you do anything, or did you see anybody do anything to secure the phone to see whether or not there were fingerprints on the phone?
No. When I went in there, the phone was off the hook and we just left it there.
I'm going to show you what's number 64, which I believe is still part of the defendant's exhibit A2.
It would just be, oh, it's part of it. Did we mark this already as A with smaller parts? Okay, so we'll group them after you complete the A series.
Thank
So
you,
A2.
Sir, you see that the phone jack is disconnected from the wall unit?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and this is another location that someone doing an investigation of a murder could examine for fingerprints, for example?
I mean, I don't know if they can, what items they can get fingerprints off of in that, like the wires or anything like that, but it's definitely evidence marked by the yellow number 1.
Right, because it would be a relevant factor for an investigator that a phone was disconnected from the wall, perhaps by the intruder, correct?
Correct.
Going to show you number 53, part of the same collection.
A3.
Sir, do you see this photo, which seems to suggest that there are wood chips from the door jamb of that particular door in the room that we're talking about?
I'm going to object to stating the evidence. I don't know if those are wood chips or paint chips.
This is a question which the
Correct.
witness may answer.
Okay, can you say it again, please?
Just to make it easier, how would you characterize the droppings under the floor jamb, the white particles? What would you call them?
Either paint chips or wood chips, just looking at the photos. I can't tell which one, but something looks like related to the door or the wall.
And based on your experience, and you've been an officer for, 30 years, correct?
Correct.
Have, in your experience, you've seen situations where a door was locked and someone forced the door open and it caused damage to the door frame?
I mean, if you want to get technical, I would probably say you might see it more where the door knob was. I don't know if I've seen something where it's at the door jamb, I would say.
Okay. Now, previously, in the last photo, there was a marker with I think it was a 1 on it. Is that correct?
Yes, yes,
In this photo, which was taken by law enforcement, correct?
correct.
Nobody even bothered to mark this as a potential source of evidence, did they?
I don't see a number there, so I don't. Somebody took the picture, but I do not see evidence number where the other one had the 1 by it.
Right, and the numbers are there so that when the SID people can come in, they can look at relevant spots, like the bullet casing will have a number, the phone jack has a number, correct?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't want to say for sure because I don't know. But normally, the SID are the ones that put down the numbers because it's something that they want to make sure they have documented or taken a photo of.
Now, when you, at some point, went out into the backyard, did you not? Do you
Yes,
recall?
I was in the rear yard.
Okay, did you notice that in the rear yard, it abutted a very hilly area? Do you remember that?
I know the area is hilly. Just offhand, I don't remember if I looked out and saw the hills or not.
Did any of you or your fellow officers do anything to look in the backyard or the hilly area for any evidence connected to the murder?
Not myself or the 3 officers I was with.
Did you observe anybody in the hilly area doing any observations to garner evidence?
No, I did not.
And of course, at that time, you didn't actually know when the murder had occurred, did you?
No, sir.
In fact, when you got there, you actually did some work inside the house looking to see if perhaps the intruder was there, correct?
Yes.
So at the time that you were in the backyard or at the time these other detectives came, this event had just come to your knowledge and you folks were interested in discovering whether or not the person who did this was still in the vicinity, correct?
Yes.
Now, evidence tape is placed around the scene, is that correct?
In this scene or just in general?
In general.
Yes, yes it is.
Do you recall if evidence tape was placed on this scene?
I believe we did some on the front. I believe that it was in the front. I don't, just offhand I don't remember, but if there was placed, it was probably placed in the front.
None in the backyard area where the door was open, correct?
No.
Now, there have been many scientific advancements for law enforcement since I started 40 years ago and you started 30 years ago. So evidence that could be collected, like hair, fingerprints, DNA, blood, door frame chippings, could be tested against modern techniques 21 years later if it wasn't compromised, correct?
Okay, I'm trying to play back what you said in my head to make sure I'm answering you directly.
I appreciate it, and I might not have asked that as well as my law school professor would have wanted to.
Okay, so you said that something about 21 years later, or?
Right. In other words, there have been advances in science. And when you do a crime scene, you preserve what you find, correct?
Correct.
And so years later, in what can be described as a cold case, the things that were collected back then can be tested by the new techniques, correct?
Correct.
And that's done on a regular basis, correct?
From what I could, I'm not involved in it, but just reading the newspaper and watching TV shows, yeah, you see things that, oh yeah, they didn't have technology then, now they have it now.
And you train your rookies to preserve and not contaminate scenes so there's as much physical evidence as possible, especially in a homicide, so that when it comes to court, you have the evidence to prove somebody guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, correct?
Correct.
It's nice to see you again, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Balian, do you have a redirect examination?
Briefly, Your Honor.
You may.
Thank you. When you arrived at the scene and responded, you testified on direct examination. Before you went inside, you guys met and conferred and came up with a plan to go inside. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And what kind of call was it again you were responding to?
I believe it was an open door.
And were you expecting to find a dead body inside?
No, I was not.
Did you even consider that you might find a dead body inside that day when you showed up there?
No, I thought of other things, but not that.
Right. And what were you thinking, based on your experience of responding to open doors, you were likely to find inside?
Well, I thought that when we responded, someone either left the door open or they rushed out the house and left the door open. I was not thinking that it would be a dead body inside.
Okay, so why is it you didn't put on some booties before you went inside?
Well, number one, we don't get them issued, and number two, I didn't think it was going to be a homicide scene, so that thought never occurred to me.
Do you have booties you keep in your car?
No, we do not.
Okay. When you got inside and found the body, do you recall, based on anything you observed, whether you could tell whether this person had just been shot or been shot sometime prior, based on what you saw?
Let me think here. All right, say the question one more time, please.
Did you think that this person had just been shot or had been shot sometime prior when you were?
I would say closer to prior. I don't know how long, but it definitely wasn't like 45 minutes or anything like that. I think it was some time had elapsed.
So you walk into an open door and you find this body on the ground. And what's the first concern you have as a police officer in that house at that moment?
Other victims and possibly the suspect.
Okay, and so where did you search for those other victims and that suspect? What's your immediate focus?
Throughout the house, anywhere where we could find someone either secreted or hiding somewhere, or anywhere where a person may be hiding out in that residence.
Okay, and did you find anyone?
No.
In your experience as a police officer, when an individual commits a violent crime, such as you came upon on that date, if they're not going to hide themselves within the house, do they stick around and wait for the police?
No, they'll commit the crime and take off.
And why is it you didn't go searching up in the local hills and the surrounding neighborhoods in terms of your duties?
Well, my duties were to secure the crime scene and focus on that residence right there where we knew something happened there. I'm not an investigator, so I don't know. All I know is there's a dead body and I have to secure this scene to get more experienced detectives and crime scene people to come and secure that.
Did you expect that whoever just shot this woman, if they were outside and saw the police rolling up, would have just stayed hiding in the bushes out there?
Your Honor, I'm going to check for that.
Overruled.
No, I didn't. I figured the person was, long gone.
Okay. Were you the lead detective on the case, responsible for what would be tested and what wouldn't be tested?
No, sir.
Were you responsible for making any of those decisions?
No.
Okay. Counsel has shown you a photograph. I think it was Defense A3. Yeah, it's up there right now. You see that photograph?
Yes, sir.
And you were saying that you don't know if those are paint chips or wood chips. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, counsel asked you a question as to whether, or asking you whether that could be something from forcing that door open. You remember that question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this picture, do you know, is this the exterior door to enter into this residence?
No, it looks like a one of the, I'm assuming one of the bedroom doors, or some room, internal room inside the house interior.
Okay, so let me show you what's previously been marked as People's 31X. Does this give you a better perspective of what Defense A3 is a better picture of?
Yes.
Okay, so this debris on the ground was not an exterior door, is that right?
Correct.
This was a bedroom door.
Yes.
And does it look like these are some sort of louvered French doors into this room?
Yeah, they're like a double doors.
In your experience, do these look like the type of doors that you would close and lock in a manner that if you force them open, you would expect to find that debris on the right side there and not in the middle or on the left side?
Correct, because they both have like handles. It appears like they both have handles. So I wouldn't imagine that to be something you need to like force open or kick open.
Okay. And did you even suspect that that debris was involved in this murder?
Until the photos, I pretty much never saw it.
Okay. The condition of this house overall, was that debris out of the ordinary? Given the condition of this house overall?
No, there was items kind of in disarray all around. It wasn't like the neatest house, I would say.
Your Honor, I have a photograph. May I mark this as, well, we're on 31, the last one was 3100. What comes after? Oh, I'm sorry.
32?
You want me to stay on the 31 series, or you want me to go to 32? Okay, may I mark this as People's 32?
Yes. Yes.
We're going to go old school in a second here, Your Honor.
Okay.
Good. Repeat.
Who's got it up there?
Repeat what's up there.
Do you recognize this photograph? Is this a photograph taken of the inside of Susan Berman's home?
I don't know. I mean, it looks like the home, but
Well, I guess, let me ask you this way. The condition of the paint on that floorboard in whatever room that was taken on, is that consistent with the general condition of the paint and the floorboards in this house?
yes, if that's from the house. Yes, there was Yes, totally. It was marks and scrapes all throughout the house.
I have another photo. May I mark this as People's 33?
Yes.
Showing you People's 33. Is that a close-up photo of this back kitchen door?
Yes, yes, it is.
And you see the condition of the paint on that back kitchen door.
Yes,
Does this photograph fairly and accurately depict the condition overall of the paint and the upkeeping of this home?
correct.
I have another photo. May I mark this as People's 34?
Yes.
Showing you People's 34. Is this a photograph taken of the inside of the front door of the residence where that Found Lulu sign was?
Yes,
You see the condition of the paint on the bottom of this door as well as the paint chips around this.
correct.
Does this fairly and accurately depict the condition of the paint and the floorboards of this home? They can't see that. Okay.
Yes, it does.
Finally, a photograph. May I mark this as People's 35?
Yes.
Is this a picture of the outside of the front door as it depicted as you saw it that day?
Yes, sir.
I'm zooming into the bottom of this door to look at the paint. Does this photograph fairly and accurately depict the condition of the paint to the bottom of that front door as you saw it that day?
Yes, sir. Yes, it does.
It was like that, like all chipping off on the bottom there?
Correct.
Given the condition of this house, is that why it was no surprise to you there was some paint chips on the floor in her bedroom?
Yes, there was.
I think
yes.
the screen may have gone out.
Okay. I have no further questions. I think the problem is with the Elmo, that screen is not working. I think.
All right. Additional cross?
Mr. Habib just asked you a question. Mr. Bailey, I apologize, just asked you a question.
Raise your voice so the jurors
I'm sorry,
can hear you.
Mr. Bailey just asked you a question about the paint chips. We're not talking about what you're thinking about now when he's showing you all the photos. Put yourself back in time when you went into that house. You found a body in a room that had doors that could be closed, that could be forced open, correct?
Yes,
You don't know what the condition of the door was prior to your arrival while Miss Berman was alive in the house, do you?
no, I did not.
So Miss Berman could have been in that room, those doors could be closed, the door could have been forced open, and those chips could be on the floor, correct?
Yes,
Okay? And most importantly, not today, but back then, when nobody knew any idea of what had happened, the singular purpose of law enforcement is to identify as many potential pieces of evidence as possible, correct?
correct.
And there is nothing showing that anybody from law enforcement in any of these pictures ever bothered to mark that spot as a place to check to see whether or not there were potential fingerprints or hair or fibers from the intruder, correct?
Because there was no number or anything there, you are correct.
Thank you, sir.
Anything else, Mr. Bailey?
1 second, Your Honor. I apologize. What was your last line of inquiry?
Besides him, you want me to coach you?
No, what was your last line of inquiry?
My last line of inquiry.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further that I need to cover.
Then may this witness be excused.
Please, thank you again.
Yes.
You're
Thank you.
excused, officer.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Thank you.
The people may call the next witness.
If I need to have her brought up, I probably need about 5 minutes.
All right. A little early for a break, but
She's just coming from down. She's just coming down the elevator.
All right, well, we will pause.
You're muted.
Dr. Sophie, Balk, Your Honor.
The witness may
You're unmuted.
come forward. Mr. Henderson, that's okay. I was going to suggest that somebody close to the witness stand give it a good wipe after each witness, but that's okay. Please be seated, Don.
Please stand.
Oh,
Raise your right hand.
listen to her.
Do you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give and the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I do.
Please be seated.
Thank you.
Please state and spell your first and last name.
Sophie, Sophie, Balk, Balk.
Thank you.
I feel like you're at a gas station and I'm going to hand you money and you're concerned I'm going to shoot you. There's so many levels of glass between us.
Right.
You're safe, Ms. Balk. Doctor.
Sorry?
I said you're safe.
Good to know.
Dr. Balk, can you please tell me what is your current occupation?
I'm a general pediatrician.
And without saying specifically, don't want your address, et cetera, but what state do you practice in?
I practice in New York State.
And how long have you been a physician?
Well, I graduated medical school in 1974 and finished residency in 1977, so about, depending on how you count, I guess it's 44 years.
And where did you do your education, your undergrad in medicine?
I went to Cornell University
For both?
for undergrad and Albert Einstein College of Medicine for medical school.
And did you do your residency at Einstein as well?
Montefiore and Einstein, yeah, in pediatrics.
And can you explain briefly when you say, and I think we might need a spelling on Montefiore.
I'm sorry?
I'm making a guess, we might need a spelling on Montefiore.
You need me to spell it?
If you can spell it.
M as in Mary, O as in Oscar, N as in Nancy, T as in Tom, E as in Edward, F as in Frank, I as in Iris, O as in Oscar, R as in Robert, E as in Edward.
And going back to 1982, when you're talking about Einstein College of Medicine and Montefiore, can you just explain, are those different entities? What does that mean?
Well, I worked for Montefiore delivering patient care services, and Einstein's the medical school, and the medical school provides medical students who train in different settings. So they were related to each other.
And is it fair to say that Albert Einstein, there are several different hospitals in the Bronx
Right.
where they send their medical students? Montefiore would be one of them?
Correct. Montefiore is one of them, Jacoby's one of them, there are several.
And can you spell Jacoby for us as well, please?
J as in
You don't
jewelry.
need the letters. I mean, we
J,
can-
okay, A-C-O-B-I.
And can you tell me specifically in February of '82, do you remember what you were doing as a pediatrician?
Well, I was providing direct patient care services at Jacoby Hospital, which is a city hospital in the Bronx. And I was also director of the fourth-year clerkship in ambulatory pediatric care.
And can you describe, first of all, what does that mean when you say a clerkship in ambulatory pediatric care? What is that?
Just a moment. Can you, I think, maybe speak closer to the microphone? I think you're soft-spoken and you've got the mask, so it's...
Yeah, the mask is...
Yes, try to project right into that microphone.
Okay, is that better?
I think that's a lot better for everyone.
Can we inquire if the jury's been able to hear? I'm just
No, I've been watching the jurors and they've been leaning forward a little bit, but were you able to hear, but you're going to hear better now. So, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, is that better still? Okay. So you want to know what a clerkship is?
Yes, please.
It's a rotation. It's the ambulatory rotation was in an outpatient setting. So
What does that mean when you say outpatient?
yeah, so the students, like most patients, are not seen in a hospital. Most patients, you know, when we go to the doctor in an office. So this ambulatory clerkship was to teach the students what it's like to be a pediatrician in an office. So we would teach them child care. Pediatricians take care of newborns through about age 21. And so there are many, many different things to learn, but we would teach them child care and care of different illnesses and developmental issues, all sorts of things that have to do with pediatrics in an office setting.
And doctor, in terms of just kind of the hours that rotation at that clinic would run, can you tell me what those would be?
They're generally 9 to 5.
And so does that mean that the medical students who are working in that rotation, they would not be staying overnight at the hospital, is that correct?
No, they would not.
And can you tell me specifically with respect to that rotation, were there tests that somebody would take in order to be able to take that rotation either right before they started or as they were starting?
No, there weren't tests before, and they wouldn't be evaluated with tests either.
And I want to just back up for a moment. In terms of your experience teaching medical students, when someone goes to medical school, and particularly back at Einstein in 1982, is it fair to say that the first 2 years were basically inside of the classroom?
That's correct. The first 2 years are inside the classroom, and the second 2 years are like an apprenticeship. You go to different settings to learn different aspects of medicine.
Is it fair to say that certain rotations are mandatory?
Yes.
And certain you can select yourself?
Correct.
And is it also fair to say that when a medical student is trying to figure out what residency they want to apply for, that one of the things they do is they do different rotations and they see, do they like this area, do they like cardiology, do they not?
Correct. Yeah, that's correct.
And your pediatric ambulatory rotation, was that a mandatory?
An ambulatory rotation was mandatory. It could be pediatrics or internal medicine, depending on the student's choices, my recollection.
So if a student chose your pediatric ambulatory rotation, they were choosing to be involved with pediatrics?
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you, back in 1982, did you keep a calendar?
I did.
And have you had a chance, we've shown you what we're going to mark as people's next in order. Where people's 36. We're going to put it up, and where will you see it? I think you have to look over your shoulder.
Oh,
no, it's right in front of you. I'm sorry.
Robin, why would this be on? You know? It's not. This, okay. There it is. It's on your screen, too.
There it is.
Okay. Do you recognize that's a page out of a calendar? Is that correct?
Correct.
And for the people that are close to your age, or they're not close to your age or my age, can you explain what that actually is, and is that actual handwriting, not a computer?
Yeah, that's a piece of paper in a calendar with notes that I took about the things that I had to do.
And archaeologists have found that primitive species used to actually write stuff down with a pen and to document what they were doing. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And can you tell me, do you recognize the handwriting there?
It appears to be my handwriting. Yes, it is my handwriting.
And do you recognize, is that your calendar from Monday, February 1st, 1982?
It is. It is.
And have you had a chance to review that previously?
Yes, I have.
I'm going to ask you, there's an entry at the top that has, looks like 3 names and a couple are crossed out.
Yes.
Can you tell me what that means?
Well, way above that, it says 5A begins. 5A was a piece of the first part of a 2-month, thank you, first part of a 2-month ambulatory care rotation. It was 5A and 5B, so 5A was the first month. So I noted that, and at 9 o'clock, since I was in charge of the clerkship, I was going to orient, it looked 3 students to what to expect. This was their first day.
And in terms of this rotation, this is for medical students, is that correct?
This would have been 4th-year medical students, correct.
And can you tell me, it looks like there are 3 names there.
Yes.
Can you translate from your handwriting what those names are?
Yes, it says Tiefenbrunn, Brunn, Kotzist, and Durst.
And you might want to spell it, I'm guessing,
All of them? Okay.
you don't need to spell Durst.
Okay,
Spell that one.
Tiefenbrunn is the first. Kotsis is the second. And Durst is the third.
And can you tell me, it looks like the first 2 are crossed out. Can you tell me what significance that has?
To me, like looking back, it appears that at that time, once I did things, I would cross out things that were done. So I crossed out the first 2, but I didn't cross out the third name.
The third name is Durst, is that correct? And what does that mean to you, given your habit and custom?
That was a long time ago. I no longer do this, but it may mean that she wasn't there, but I can't say for sure.
And did you become aware later that Kathy Durst was supposed to have started that rotation and did not show up?
I must have been made aware that day, but it was 39 years ago, and then certainly I was made aware later, years later.
Now, I want to ask you, when I say the name Kathy Durst, is that somebody you actually ever met?
No, I never met her.
And as far as you know, is that somebody you ever talked to?
As far as I know, correct. I'd never talked to her.
And you indicated that the rotation she was going to be taking was supposed to last from February 1st of 1982 until March 31st of 1982. Is that right?
That's correct.
Can you tell me, how did you find out, as best you can remember, that Kathy Durst had disappeared?
I probably heard about it on the news.
And so as you sit here today, is it fair to say that you can tell me that at some point in time you learned that Kathy Durst had disappeared, but exactly how you found out, you don't remember?
I don't recall. Right.
And since you had never met Kathy Durst before, did you have any knowledge about any potential or alleged attendance issues she might have had?
I had no knowledge of any attendance issues.
And would that mean that you also have no memory or knowledge of ever notifying the school about any attendance issues with Kathy?
I don't know. I have no memory of notifying the school.
I want to talk for a moment just generally, in your experience with this rotation, if a medical student was not going to come into work, who would they be responsible to call?
They would be responsible to call their local supervisor or their local supervisor's office, and that would have been me.
And at that time, were students in advance? Did they know, in other words, did Kathy Durst, would she have known that she was going to be starting this rotation in advance, or would that have been something that they would have just told her that morning when she showed up?
Oh, no, they would have told her in advance. I mean, these things are carefully planned months in advance for all the students.
And are the students given contact information for the individuals they're going to be working for?
Yes, they are given contact information. They would have either had my beeper or my number and/or my secretary's number to contact me.
Again, for the younger jurors we might have who might not understand what a beeper is, can you again explain this primitive?
I actually have a beeper, but not with me. I've chosen to keep a beeper. It's one method of contacting people. That used to be more prevalent. Now people tend to use cell phones.
And is it fair to say that what would happen is that someone would dial the number, your number, the pager would go off.
Right.
There'd be a number that it said, or some talk to you, right, if you had fancy ones, and then you would call that number back. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is it fair to say that for many years before cell phones, that's how doctors operated?
Exactly fair to say.
So it is your testimony that based on your training experience and your practice in being a doctor, that any medical student who was going to be starting would have had your pager?
They would have had either my pager and or my, my phone number or the local secretary's number to reach me.
Let me ask you something. In your approximately 45-year career in teaching individuals, have you ever had a student that was due to come in for the first day of a rotation not contact you to tell you they weren't going to be there?
I can't recall anyone. I mean, students they're generally very communicative. We are going to be evaluating them. They want to make a good impression.
In your experience, would it be under the ordinary course of business for a student to, instead of calling you, in other words, you have a student who's going to be starting your ambulatory clerkship, that instead of calling you, calling a dean at the medical school?
That would not make sense.
Can you explain why, please?
Because they know to contact their local supervisor. It's a local issue. For if you're going to be out for a day or two, you contact your local supervisor.
Let me ask you, did the medical school, were they even on the same floor, the same building, the same location as you?
No, they're in a totally different area, a totally different building, about a quarter mile away.
And let me ask you, if someone had, let's assume someone had called the dean to say they were going to be absent, would that have led, by calling the dean, to you finding out by procedure that the person wasn't going to be there?
Eventually, but they have, I think there are like 180 medical students, and they can't keep track of all the schedules of every student. That would be ridiculous. So it's really, the students know to call locally.
Let me ask you something. Let's assume that a student is only going to have a one-day absence.
Yeah.
They're going to be gone for 1 day. In that situation, would it be the normal protocol where a medical student would have believed, you know what, if I don't show up to my rotation for 1 day, that the dean is going to be called?
No.
Is it fair to say then that if somebody wasn't going to show up for 1 day, that really the only way the dean is going to find out that they didn't show up is if they call them, right?
Is if they call the dean?
Yes. In other words, you're not going to call the dean, correct?
For a 1 day absence? No. If someone's sick, I expect them back the next day.
So I want you to assume for a second that a student had attendance issues. And I want you to assume that. And let's assume that with those attendance issues, that student was concerned that their attendance issues might reflect poorly upon them. Are you following me so far?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that in that scenario, the only way that the dean or a dean actually finds out that they don't show up for 1 day is they would have to call the person or contact the person they're concerned about finding out they're not going to be at work and tell them that?
You mean they would have to call me?
No. I'm saying if they called you,
Yeah.
you're not going to call the dean, correct?
I'm getting...
Okay, let me back up. Poor question on my part. Let me back up here. So what I'm asking you is as the person who's running that
Right.
rotation, if someone calls in sick for 1 day, you've already testified, you're not going to be calling the dean to say,
No.
so-and-so didn't show up, correct?
No.
So my question was, let's assume that someone is actually concerned that the dean is going to find out that they missed 1 day of a rotation. What I'm asking you is, isn't the only logical way the dean is going to find out in that scenario is if they themselves tell the dean? You're not going to tell them.
I'm not telling the dean. There's no reason for me to tell the dean.
I want to ask you, in terms of the timing of your clinic,
Yeah.
what time did it start?
9 o'clock.
So I want you to assume for a moment that somebody was going to be sick And I'm not even now asking you about who they're going to call. I'm going to ask you when they're going to call. When would you expect a fourth-year medical student to call in to report that they were going to be absent?
At the latest 9 o'clock, but probably earlier. Like, for example, like last week or 2 weeks ago, I experienced vertigo. I had when I moved my head, I got dizzy, and I was afraid of driving. And I knew I had patient schedule, so as soon as I realized I wasn't going to be able to go to work, I called 7:30 in the morning. I called my local people, my administrator, a colleague who does scheduling, so that they can take care of the patients.
And doctor, in your experience, are you describing in your conduct, is that just out of the ordinary conduct for you in trying to contact people early, or is that the culture? Was that the culture at the medical school in 1982?
Well, I think it's just logical. There are patients that are relying on you, and if you don't show up, accommodations have to be made. There are attending physicians who are expecting you, and if you don't show up, accommodations have to be made. So the earlier, the better.
When I say the term "the match," do you know what that term is?
Sure.
Can you explain to the jury, what does that mean, the match?
Medical students, they create a list of residencies that they're interested in going to. They create a list of first choice, second choice, third choice, etc. And they interview for these residencies. And then the residencies make their own list. And the match, hopefully, the medical student and the residents, if things go well for the medical student, they each choose each other as number one. So they match, the medical student matches to their number one choice.
And is it an accurate statement to say that when you are matching into a residency, you're not just matching into, for instance, I want to be at Montessori. You're actually also matching into, I want to be a cardiologist, or I want to be a plastic surgeon, correct?
Absolutely. By fourth year, early in the fourth year, they've decided where they're headed, what specialty they're headed for, either internal medicine, pediatrics, surgery, OBGYN, a whole host of different specialties.
And I want you to explain to the jury, so as lawyers, we can do whatever we want. We can be a plaintiff's attorney, or we can be a criminal defense attorney, etc. Is it fair to say, though, that for doctors, you can't just automatically say, you know what, I'm going to be a plastic surgeon. You have to match into plastic surgery, correct?
Correct. For that particular example, you generally have to do like a general surgery residency first, but right, you specify at a certain point where you want to go.
Right, and what I'm asking, though, is just because I put down in the match that I want to be a plastic surgeon anywhere, it doesn't mean that I'm going to match into plastic surgery, much less that I'm going to match into plastic surgery at the location I want to be.
That is correct.
And let's talk about pediatrics for a second. If somebody was interested in doing pediatrics in the New York area who was an Einstein Medical School graduate, was it very common for Einstein medical students to rank very highly Einstein-affiliated institutions?
Many of them do, yes.
And is it also fair to say that, as an example, let's assume that I am a student who wants to be a pediatrician, and I have a rotation in dermatology, and I don't want to be a dermatologist. Is it fair to say that you could argue that I would have less incentive to impress the individuals at the dermatology rotation than I would in an area, in a specific program that I might be applying to?
That you could say that's generally true, depending on who you are, but that is generally true.
On which part?
I'm sorry?
Depending on how?
I don't know who you are. So depending on who you are.
Who you are. Some people are very interested in impressing everyone very favorably.
So Dr. Balk, in that last answer, you're looking at it as if I'm going to make a guess that in your career you have attempted to do your best work in every rotation you ever went to.
Towards the later parts of my life, yes.
So I want to now change the hypothetical, and I want to ask you, I want you to assume that a student has the intention of actually doing a residency in pediatrics in New York City, potentially at an Einstein-affiliated hospital. And they are in their 4th year, a couple of months from graduating. Based on your experience, how important would it be to that medical student to want to put their best foot forward on a rotation?
It would be very important for them to do so. We're going to be, their attending physicians who they're going to be working with on the rotation will be rating them, seeing how they work, seeing their knowledge base, seeing how they interact with patients, seeing how kind they are to people, seeing how, they integrate different factors of patients' lives into their medical care, So, we work very closely with them. So it would be very important for them to have us think positively of them.
And would it potentially make a less than ideal impression for a 4th-year medical student to call in sick right at the time when or even after the time when their duties were supposed to start?
I would look at that not favorably, generally. It might indicate lack of seriousness to the mission of taking care of patients and learning, about pediatrics.
My last area of inquiry, Doctor, in terms of the culture for physicians in 1982, everybody always says, when I was a kid, I had to walk through glass to get to school, etc. But is it fair to say that in your generation and in Kathy Durst's generation, that what was required of medical students and residents was more demanding and less coddling than it is today?
That is fair to say. I mean, we generally, the culture was, we came in sick. I mean, COVID has changed our thinking about coming in sick. But when, in 1982 and for years after that, unless you were if you could get to work, you came to work to take care of the patients. That was the culture.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Lewis, you may cross-examine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to try to modulate my voice where I'm not yelling at you. You seem like a very nice lady, so I don't want you to think I'm yelling at you, but I want to make sure our ladies and gentlemen of the jury can hear me. If I get too loud, please tell me.
Okay.
I only have a few areas, so this should not take long at all, and I may jump around a little bit just to be efficient, so if I go somewhere and you don't follow me, please stop me, okay?
Okay.
Now, you made it clear on your direct testimony with Mr. Lewin that this was 4 decades ago.
Correct.
And in fairness to you, until about 5 or 6 years ago, you hadn't probably given this much of any thought. Is that fair?
That is fair.
But unfortunately, 5 or 6 years ago, several detectives and prosecutors, the fine folks from the LA County DA's office included, began reaching out to you to ask you about these areas that Mr. Lewin has covered today, correct?
Correct.
And you did your best to recall the events of 4 decades ago with the help of your calendar, etc., correct?
Correct.
In fairness to you, Dr. Balk, you did make it clear when those investigators started calling that you did not know specifically what instructions Kathy Durst might have been given relative to contacting the clinic. Is that fair?
I know what the general instructions were to students.
That's fine.
The specific, yes,
And in fact, in fairness to you, back on February 24th of 2015 at 8:30 in the morning, do you recall being contacted via your cell phone by an investigator, Taylor?
which date was that?
February 24th, 2015.
Do I recall being contacted on that particular date?
No, do you recall a conversation? I'm just orienting you to time, in fairness to you, about what conversation I'm talking about.
If you tell me the date, I don't recall the specific date.
Well, do you recall a Detective Taylor asking you about the ordinary protocol for medical students notifying clinics that they may not be present?
I can't say that I recall that conversation.
Fair enough. And you've made my point.
I'm sorry?
You've made my point. These conversations, there were multiple conversations. You don't recall what your specific answers were. Fair enough?
No, I don't.
And what you've tried to do today is convey to the jury with Mr. Lewin's direction what the general protocol would have been, correct?
That is correct.
Now, relative to Kathy Durst, you have been associated with Einstein for quite a few years.
That's right.
So you are well aware that the Durst family was very instrumental in the founding and the continued funding of Einstein Medical School.
I was not aware of that.
You were not?
No.
Okay. Well, along Mr. Lewin's line, if you will assume to me that my representation is correct, that the Durst family was very involved in the contribution and the founding of Einstein Medical School.
Your Honor, I would ask that it be put to the witness as a hypothetical, not.
He is a hypothetical.
Well, he's including my partners are likely to be a hypothetical, not.
This is, by its nature, a hypothetical question. So just for the sake of answering this, we'll have you assume the truth of this suggestion.
With that assumption in mind, Dr. Balk, would it now surprise you that Mrs. Durst had a different relationship with the supervisors, the leadership of Einstein Medical School than perhaps other students whose family had not been quite so influential at Einstein?
That's going to call for multiple levels of speculation.
Speculation sustained. Do not answer questions when I sustain the objection.
Okay.
You had no prior relationship with Kathy Durst, correct?
No.
In fact, you had no idea who she was.
That is correct.
No contact with her via phone or any whatsoever.
As far as I remember, that is correct.
Would it make sense to you, Dr. Balk, that she might feel more comfortable discussing her personal issues with someone she did have a prior relationship with?
That's going to call for speculation.
Sustained.
Let me rephrase. Does it make sense to you that someone who's calling to discuss personal issues would prefer to do that with someone they had a prior relationship with?
It depends on the situation.
Okay. Well, in this situation, you've now come to know that Kathy Durst's complaint was one of a personal nature about her bowel movements, her health. You know that as you sit here, right, Dr. Balk?
I've been informed of that.
Right. And that was my question. Did you understand?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am. Would it make sense to you if someone with those personal issues might feel more comfortable discussing them with a person they had a prior personal relationship with?
I think you're asking a very general question, and it depends on the
Just
person.
like Mr.
It
Lewin
depends
did.
on the situation. I can't answer that. I mean,
So you can't tell me whether a person might feel more comfortable discussing their personal issues with someone that's not a complete stranger. Is that what you're saying?
So I'm gonna.
I can't.
I'm not going to allow that.
It's just there's too many factors involved in any particular situation.
You need not answer for that reason. Okay.
Are you aware that Ms. Durst had a prior relationship with the dean of Einstein Medical School?
That's going to again call for. She doesn't know.
Is
that.
she aware?
It's going to call for speculation.
Is
It's a
that
yes or
fact?
no?
Speculation, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Assumes also facts, not evidence.
Sustained. Yes. Sustained.
Are you aware, Dr. Balk, that Ms. Durst had a conversation with the Dean of Einstein Medical School on January 29th?
I have been told that there is a report of a,
This is gonna call for hearsay at this point in
Well,
time.
let's see.
Not off.
I'm not going to have an objection to the answer, but the conversation. Okay, overruled.
You may continue.
you said
Are you
January
aware of it?
29th? No, I am not aware of that.
You're not aware?
No.
I'm not quarreling with you. I'm making sure I understood your answer. So let me ask you the follow-up question. Are you aware? Well, let's go at it a different way. Let's finish with this. You were ultimately given the message that Kathy Durst had called to let the dean know she was ill and would not make clinic on February 1st.
Your Honor, that's gonna, again, call for speculation, assumes facts, not evidence.
Overruled.
Would you like me to repeat it, Dr. Balk?
Yes.
You were ultimately informed that Mrs. Durst, through the dean, made it clear that she was not going to make clinic on Monday, February the 1st of 1982.
Your Honor, it assumes a fact, not an evidence, that she made the call. The question itself assumes Kathy Durst made the call.
No, I don't think so.
If you read the question, Your Honor, that's what he's saying.
You know, I recall, Your Honor, not objecting to Mr. Lewin.
Well,
All right, hold on. For Miss Durst made clear she was not going to make the clinic. I get it. You have to rephrase that question.
Dr. Balk, you were informed, were you not, that someone, opposition Kathy Durst, contacted the dean.
There's another way to go about it, just that she wouldn't make it. Try to ask a question about that.
John, I just try to craft the question the best way I know how.
I know, I just gave you a little suggestion there,
You were informed that the dean received a call that Kathy Durst was not going to make it to clinic on February 1st, correct?
I must have been informed by someone at that time that she wasn't coming.
Okay. So
But
you,
I
I'm sorry, I
don't-
didn't mean to step on your answer. Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I don't recall how I was informed, but I must have been informed at some point.
Indeed. And so you can assume with me, to go down Mr. Lewin's road, that whether she followed the protocol you thought she would follow, she called someone who knew to get the message to you, right?
Your Honor, that assumes a fact, not an evidence that Kathy
Yes,
Durst
sustained.
made the call.
Need a break?
Let me ask you this, Dr. Ball. The effectiveness of whatever protocol was used, you got the message, right?
I must have gotten the message.
In fairness, then, the message got delivered to the right person, which is you, right?
It must have gotten to me. Something, she didn't show up, so some communication must have occurred.
And in your discussions previous to being here with the various detectives and DAs, you stated, I think very honestly, that you were informed that she would not be at clinic. Whether it was before 9 o'clock or after, you got the message.
I must have been informed 39 years ago of that.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Last little unrelated area. I want to turn back to those 39 years ago. The South Bronx, the area that Einstein Medical School is located, back then, that was not a very safe place to be.
It's not in the South Bronx, sir.
I'm sorry. The location of Albert Einstein Medical School relative to 1982 was not a safe area to be in.
First of all, it's in the Northeast Bronx, sir, and not in the South Bronx.
My apologies.
And I would take issue with that.
Okay, so you would take issue with the students at Einstein Medical School back in 1982 were in fact cautioned not to walk alone in the area. You would dispute that?
I can't, I cannot comment on that, but when I was a student at Einstein, which was
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive.
from 74 to 77,
Objection,
from
Your Honor.
71 to 74, I wasn't cautioned to that.
Okay, that wasn't the, I'll strike and have the jury disregard it. That was not responsive to the question asked.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Balk. Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Dr. Brock, a couple of questions. Do you know specifically when you found out that Kathy Durst had not shown up? In other words, did you know at the time that, strike that, I'm sorry, strike that. Long day for me. Let me start over. At some point, you were advised that a call had been made with somebody claiming that they were Kathy Durst to the dean. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
It's foundational to the question, Your Honor. It's not leading. That's a
Right.
statement of fact.
Well, I'll sustain it. Go about it a different way.
Dr. Bach, at some point in time, did you become aware of an alleged call to one of the deans at Albert Einstein Medical School regarding Kathy Durst?
I must have gotten information that she wasn't coming.
Now the question, though, is Mr. Lewis in his questions, the insinuation was that you found out that morning that she wasn't coming. Is that correct or incorrect?
Your Honor, I have objection to the form of the question.
I can't recall.
Overruled.
And ma'am, Mr. Lewis asked you a moment ago about the comfort. Would somebody be more comfortable discussing a medical student based on your training and experience? Would a medical student be more comfortable talking about the intricacies of their bowel movements, etc., with someone they know? Do you recall that series of questions?
Yes.
I want to ask you, based on your experience, doctor, would you expect that a medical student would be more comfortable calling a male dean at the medical school that they attend to explain to them that they have diarrhea and cramps rather than their female supervisor at the rotation they were supposed to come to?
Objection, Your Honor, false or speculation.
Sustain.
I believe Mr. Lewis's questions were...
I sustain those too.
I think they were. I think his question was answered. It was. I didn't object. I think it's in the record. I'm just trying to follow up on these areas.
Okay, we're taking a recess until 3:25. Doctor, do not discuss your testimony with any other witness. During 15 minutes and finish very